a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Do you want to know about the 5 myths stopping you from sustaining high performance? Well, in this podcast, I have a very special guest named Lindsay Briner. She is a world-renowned executive coach, advisor, and neuropsychologist. She is most widely known for her expertise and academic accomplishments in the field of wellness technologies, transpersonal psychology, and the neuroscience of human performance. Through her PhD training, she has been featured in international academic conferences and publications in peer-reviewed journals, with a focus on neuroscience and the psychology of stabilized flow. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Lindsay.
Hi, Dylan.
Hey, Lindsay, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about all things flow related and really understanding the mindset of high performance. I think we all want high performance, and sometimes we tend to get in our own way. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I'd like to kick things off. So what kind of got you? Can you talk to me just a little bit about your origin stories of like what got you in the whole area of psychology and flow and high performance?
Yeah, sure. Well, that there's flow and then, why I got into psychology. And with flow, I started off really young as a long distance runner, like literally like fourth grade. I started long distance competing with my dad and just, took it really seriously as I aged and just became addicted to that adrenaline and rush of the flow, or the runner's high, um, and at certain points in my running career, I got injured and lost my ability to compete, and then started seeking out alternative forms of having the same experience that I was kind of addicted to, which was the runner's high, like the endorphins that come with it. And also, like, I lost like my sense of identity because I wasn't having that experience. And so I started being introduced to yoga and meditation and started experimenting with these other more Eastern kind of approaches to getting into a similar mindset. And then I also, just always just really wanted to help people. I thought was going to go into social work. I just saw like a lot of suffering in the world and just really wanted to help people. And then I took my first neuroscience class and kind of like put the two together and was like, okay, there's something here, and just like followed my heart essentially. Yeah.
That's awesome. And it's also finding that passion, that fix around a performance, right? Long distance running is a high performance thing where you have to, you're constantly pushing yourself at your edge. And then it's interesting because then that it's a difficult thing to try to communicate what flow is and what those elements are and how to put those things together. It's like as soon as you think about it, you lose it. It's being in the zone, and you're like, oh, I'm in the zone, and it immediately drops you out of the zone, right? So it's funny and it's ironic, but it's true. So it's like, how do you become aware of being in the flow while you're in the flow along those edges? And I'd love to talk to you just a little bit about that when you're talking about flow, and how do you help people find their flow? How do you work with people to achieve that high performance?
Well, first, if it's okay, like before I answer your question, I'd love to just like kind of like define what we're talking about here, because there's like the mainstream kind of standard model of flow state and peak performance, which is this, widely studied under the conditions of like, professional athletes, musicians, and artists, and they have their performance task that they want to be in flow state in, right? When they're on the court and shooting basketball hoops or like doing their music on stage, and so they have to like do a state change to get into that peak performance mode. And there's a lot of research on it. And basically what it is like being fully immersed, like merging with the task at hand, where you're at one, like unity in action, where you kind of lose the sense of self in the merging with the thing that you're performing, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back to regular life and you're just a normal person, right? You experience this extraordinary moment of a peak performance state, and then you go back and you're just ordinary again. And so it's a temporary state, right? Of extraordinary experience. That's, like you said, like part of the way that it's defined is that it's unexplainable, because like you just can't, like it's just so epic, right? There's like no words. And so, but my unique kind of my unique contribution to the arena of flow state and performance excellence research and understanding is like the concept of stabilized flow. And it's this level of self-mastery and performance excellence that translates into all areas of life, where you're actually able to be like fully present and fully immersed, like task by task and moment to moment in a high performance state, no matter what you're doing in your relationships, in your work, in your just daily activities, and experiencing an extraordinary state of consciousness in an ordinary day-to-day way. Right. And so that's kind of my unique approach, is the stabilized flow, which is an ongoing state versus like a temporary peak state. So it's slightly different.
Well, yeah, and I'd love to learn more about that and trying to understand the terminologies, because flow, which was made famous by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi back in the day and all that stuff, right? And gone
Yeah.
through, and Jamie Wheel and all that jazz. You're
Yeah.
talking about the cycle of flow, right? You have the effort, then you have the rest and the recovery, and then you cycle through things. So it's an unsustainable peak that you can't continue on because of the taxation it does on the system. The fact that it's overly, you can't be in flow the entire time. Otherwise, you're unable to plan for the future, think about the past, the ruminating mind, and all that fun stuff. So how do you stay in stabilized flow? Is there not a flow cycle that comes along with it, or how does it work?
It's a different level of intensity, right?
Okay, yeah.
Where like you can still have a sense of self,
Mhm.
because the sense of self is the, central organizing principle of our
Yeah.
life. So it's not about getting rid of the self completely. And it's just like, my PhD internship was at the Trans Tech Lab in Palo Alto.
Cool.
And we studied stabilized flow and this transition from, the default mode network of temporal processing the brain and switching into a persistent experience of like parallel processing in the brain and having this kind of non-dual experience. And what changes, the difference, my understanding of the difference of like a peak flow state and like what we're talking about here in stabilized flow is that like there's, like I said, different levels of intensity and or like locations of depth and intensity. And like maybe for a specific task, you turn up the notch of intensity and can have that kind of climax of a peak flow state. But then you have like learned the techniques and ability to kind of self-regulate that notch of intensity to lower levels to be able to go switch task to task and still plan for the future at a high performance state without going back into the default mode network of the brain of that narrative mind, right? So that's does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm thinking about a couple of elements here. So one, if you look at stir, right, you're looking at selflessness, timelessness. You're looking at effortlessness and richness of the environment. Those are elements that make up a flow state. Now, what you're saying that is that what you're having is more of what you're focusing on. What it sounds like is like the effortlessness of it, in terms of maybe you don't have the selflessness, so you still understand yourself, but you have that effortlessness, so you're able to move through things without friction. The same way that dolphins don't really sleep, the way that dolphins they basically alternate half brains, right? So they have half of the brain sleep as they move through things. They kind of sleep with one eye open. So they're still moving, they're resting, and they're recovering, but they're moving along, and they can switch into alert mode as need be or dial things up. So
no
is that
resistance to existence.
yeah. So
Stabilized flow, yeah.
Okay, so it's helped me because it's the first time I've actually come across the terminology, and I'm trying to wrap. I know a bit about flow, and I'm just trying to like wrap my head around this other element of it. It sounds like it's these low level stabilized flow that allows you to kind of go through things so that you can do it with less effort, so it's less taxing the system, so that you can kind of sustain it for longer.
Yeah, and it's the effortlessness is totally foundational, and then what comes with that too is, like, better decision making, greater clarity, better relationships, and so the long-term planning that you mentioned actually becomes way more efficient right? Because when we're in our prefrontal mode of our narrative mind, we're essentially in the narrative of what locks us into the fight or flight response and the stress response, right? And so if we're actually able to unhook from that and stay out of that narrative mind, or like what I call the false self narrative that hooks us into our fight or flight response, if we're able to unhook from that and stay there, then we're actually able to strategically plan for the future with less impulsive behavior. And because you're not in fight or flight, right? And when you're so stressed out, you make bad decisions. You're impulsive, and it's like short-term decision making. And so you're actually able to have, with this parallel processing of the stabilized flow, you can think more clearly, more effectively, for better long-term strategy and outcome.
That's a really good thing. And looking at understanding, because a lot of people are unconscious of the states that they're in. Some
Yeah,
people feel whatever they feel or whatever they think or whatever is true. Everything's on fire, the world's thing, and everything. There's no hope, and it's true, right?
yeah,
And it becomes their reality, right? Whether it's true or not, it's their reality.
yeah.
But part of the thing is becoming first aware, and then being able to choose the states you move into, right? Which is tricky. So how do someone become aware of where they're at and knowing that they're in a fight or flight sense, or they know they're in a certain mindset? And because I think the first thing is awareness, and then being able to actually move into where you want to go. So can you talk to me a little about how people first become aware of what state they're in?
Yeah, well, when I work with my clients or in my groups that I teach, I start with really getting into the heavy, like, underworld of the narrative mind, right? Like, of our unconscious and subconscious conditioning, right? Because, like you said, Donald Hoffman, an incredible cognitive neuroscientist out of UC Irvine, says, that 99% of our behavior is functioning from the unconscious mind. 99%, so it's about getting in there and, like, doing some figuring it out. Like, I don't like to figure too much of it out and get stuck there, that because a lot of Western therapy kind of like gets you into your narrative mind and that false self narrative, and then it just kind of perpetuates the stories, and you get kind of stuck there. So I'm like, I go in there, I offer some frameworks around how to do some detective work around what is that, like, archetype of, like, your basic, like, I think about it as like a sine waves, right, that moves like in your prefrontal cortex, that has like an algorithm that has determined like all of your decisions of, like, who you are and all of the choices that you have made. And it's motivation. It's like what motivates you to be you, to doing and make choices, right? And there's like the underworld of it is like this the subconscious, and like where our earliest traumas and our earliest conditionings, right? And identifying what that really is, using, like, very well researched frameworks, and just becoming more and more aware of what it is, so that we don't have to identify with it as much. So we can catch ourselves when we get triggered into the fight or flight response, and it's like, oh, there's my victim, like, there's my projection of, like, needing a hero, and here's me being a hero projecting that other person as being a victim, and me needing to, like, um, help them, when really they just need to be a little, it's like disempowering. And so there's different frameworks. That's like, the Cartman's drama triangle is like one, is like being able to learn just a little bit to be able to catch yourself when you're falling into these patterns, and knowing your story just enough to rise above the clouds of your story, right? And then function from, like, the whole sky rather than those clouds of what's keeping us limited, right?
Can you say a little bit about the Cartman's triangle? I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so the Cartman's drama triangle, this is like the simplest framework that I could offer
Sure,
with
yeah.
all the subconscious stuff, because it can get pretty deep. But, like, so there's the hero, the victim, and the villain, right? And so that's like anytime you find yourself enlisting yourself in one
Yeah.
of those roles, or enlisting other people in one of those roles, it's probably some false story that you're making up, that's based on your conditioning and your patterns. And you want to really catch yourself and look at, and this is great, like, in business, and with your collaborators, and with my executive clients, is to really, like, when we get caught up in all of these stories, is it really true? Are you functioning from your wound and, like, the unmet needs of your childhood, or are you functioning from your true nature and what's, like, really motivating you outside of that wounding, right?
Yeah, I found it's so funny because the hero, villain, victim is something that I've I don't know how I came across it, but because I've run the Hero's Journey podcast, and I listen to understand people's journeys, and there's really stories of transformation. And I think there's a perspective of being empowered and going, is this something that I accept responsibilities? Is this something that I bring in? Because if you stay in the mindset that I can't change anything, nothing will change, and everything that happens to me is not my fault, it's not a very empowering perspective to be in. That's why I like the mindset of an empowerment mindset of saying this is something that I will take ownership. Maybe it was my fault or not my fault. It's not a big deal. Whatever it is, am I responsible? Do I at least have the power within to make some sort of effective change? If I can't change the environment through my own courage, then I have the wisdom to know the difference and be able to then shift my mindset and go, this is okay, great. Then this is reality, and this is now my new perspective. And
Yeah.
those are something I've doing a lot as I bring people through the podcast and thinking about it. I find it a very empowering thing to look at those two lenses. But I know they're just stories. These are just stories that were lenses that we're putting on to see the world. Is there a deeper truism that's below that you're talking about, like a more empowered or more healing perspective to view lenses through?
Yeah, so then on the other side of that, there's the virtuous triangle, where the hero becomes the coach, the victim becomes the creator, and the villain becomes the challenger, right? And so it's just this like slight difference of what can be real and true, and how we're perceiving and getting caught up in these stories, right? Because it's like it's okay that these stories can come up, and it's just about like identifying what's fundamentally real and true, and not getting too caught up in this, the drama of it, right? And just being like, okay, like what's really going on here? Is the victim maybe just like someone who needs a little bit of coaching instead of like disempowering them, right? And is the villain just actually offering some challenging material to actually get us to the next level of what we can co-create here, you know?
Mm. So then I'm walking through this. The virtuous cycle here is, so you're saying, uh, not the hero becomes the coach. The victim can get coached,
Yeah,
right? And the hero can become a creator. Is
yeah,
that right? And
yeah,
then the villain is, instead of being a villain, it's just someone to test us to be able to rise to the occasion.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Oh yeah, it's one of the things that there's something that we're working on and something we're building out that's its rivals cause us to ascend. The true thing of a rival is causing us to ascend. A true rival is someone that challenges you at that most difficult time so that you can both ascend together. It's not
Yeah,
it's not me like I want you to lose because I'm this. It's like I want you to challenge me to grow, right? And
yeah,
that
yeah.
that leaning on
Get
each
out of
other.
that adversarial role playing, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
right and wrong and good and
Y-
bad. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not you're preventing me. It's your by this the suffering is challenging me to grow. So I love that. These are great. These are fun for me. I'm learning new concepts here. I'm taking copious notes. This is great. You said I want to bring it back a little bit. You said you PhD, or you're working on that internship PhD over at the Trans Tech Labs, which is a super like high tech. I mean, there's a lot of elements going on there. I haven't been to it myself, but um, I had Dr. Jeffrey Martin on before.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Yeah.
it's super fun. And did you get a chance? I heard that they have, and I haven't tried it yet. A gun that you can shoot into the brain, a sonic brain gun or something that actually causes you to like enlighten yourself or something like that. He was
Yeah.
talking about that, and I was like, whoa! There's a consciousness gun or something like that. I don't know can you talk to me just about any of the
Yeah.
technologies that you
Yeah.
experienced there?
I
Yeah.
was actually like around at the conception of that whole project, and
Yeah.
when that's Jay Sanguinetti's project. Actually, you might want to interview him too. And
Okay.
I went over to the University of Arizona as a visiting scholar, and initially working using an ultrasound device on the brain for Alzheimer's and TBI patients.
Um,
And then Jay Sanguinetti is very close friends and colleagues with Shinzen Young, who's a famous meditation teacher. And Shinzen and Jay kind of came up with this idea of stimulating the area of the brain that was associated with suffering. And so then Jeffrey brought them over to our lab in California after I got back. And basically, yeah, like wanted to do retreats and all this stuff, and like they really tried to pull back because ultrasound, I mean, it's incredible technology, and this is the cutting edge of like Alzheimer's research, especially too. And they're also using it for meditation and mindfulness, but they really had to pull back on some of the claims and like really get clear on like the safety protocols, because you're like literally like you can target an area deep in the brain, like the size of like smaller than the size of a grain of sand, so it's like the potential is huge, but like there's ethics that need to be held around it to test to make sure it's like reasonable, but that's the direction that we are going with that type of technology. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, man. It's talk about hacking the game. You're really like you're shooting, and we're just, we're monkeys who invented guns, right? And you're given to other people. Like myself, I'm a monkey, right? You give that if you gave me a brain gun, you're like, oh shit, I'm like, yeah, sure, that seems like a good idea, and just start shooting it. It's I think the fact that there's technology that comes out, it's super exciting. There needs to be reverence. There needs to be things like that. But
Exactly.
it's also so seductive. It's so seductive to be
Yeah.
like, oh, I could spend, 40 years meditating on top of a mountain, or I could just put this sonic gun to my brain and just pull the trigger. At the same time, I do see that there are challenges to that, right? There definitely are.
Challenges, yeah.
But it's fascinating. It's so fascinating to hear you talk about that. It is the tip of the spear of these things, and there's healthier ways, not healthier, I guess, safer ways to get along that path. I just found it to be fascinating. So when you mentioned that, I wanted to bring that up because I've heard about that, and it does seem both amazing and terrifying
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time. So
Yeah. Well,
cool.
that's why I really like working with executives who are doing like positive impact work in the world, to like really think about that long-term strategy, because the world is a mess, right?
Yeah.
We live in a crisis aware world, and there's just more and more and more of it. And so to work with like these executives to really get them into this stabilized flow that they can think about the long-term ethics and make good decision making with whatever businesses they have, and especially in the technology industry. And I do a lot of consulting for wellness technology companies for this reason, to like really like get into the ethics of this long-term vision of where we're going as a species and a humanity, and talking about who and what we are, right? And then I also bring it into my coaching work, I send a lot of my clients protocols and virtual reality to do limiting belief work and stuff like that. So it's fun too.
Oh, that's awesome. So
Yeah.
let's break down a couple. You said a lot of stuff. I want to break down each one. No, it's great. This is great. This is all fascinating things. There's in my mind, I was just like, okay, I'm gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about that. So let's break this down one piece at a time. So first of all, you help executive coaches. Okay, what do you help them? They are where, and you help them get to where?
I help executives, not executive coaches. Yeah.
Sorry, you're
Yeah,
right.
no, it's okay. So I do performance.
I merged that in my head. You're right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I do performance coaching for executives or like leadership teams, and it's like a mindset training, like a flow mindset training, to teach them the techniques that I have. It's kind of like this formula that I've developed over the last 10 years to access this stabilized flow. And it's a combination of like what we already talked about, looking into these patterns of our default mode, of our narrative mind, identifying limiting beliefs and what that false self narrative is, to like be able to identify with it much less, and then add in a stack of different meditation techniques and a stack of different positive psychology techniques. And it's really the combination of those three things, where if someone who's really like has the willpower to do the things on a regular basis, it'll get them the outcome of stabilized flow. It's
And what if they don't have the willpower?
then you're screwed.
Like sort of like accountability, sit over them with a large stick and carrot, and just and beat
Well,
them.
I have had that problem with some of my clients, and then it's about like working with the personality, and sometimes they just really need to focus on self-care, number one, before they like have the capacity. I mean, some people are so stressed out, You know, these poor people, like, come to me and they're like freaking out. They're either going to have a heart attack or end up in a mental health institution, right? Because they're like so stressed, like burnout, like the epitome of burnout, you know? And so then the approach is like slightly different and like just getting them to a healthy baseline, right? And then offering them this formula. So this formula is for like healthy people, you know, not people like in like freak out mode, you know? And so it's about having a healthy baseline to be able to then optimize what the baseline is, right?
Yeah. So with especially with executives, there seems to be a thing with the mindset of I'm gonna go hard until I hit the ground, right?
Yeah, that's one of the myths. You got it.
Aha! Let's see if we can. Oh no, let's see how many we can get as we go through this. As we go through this, but that's the thing is they just said, okay, I don't have time to recover. I don't have time for the performance. So instead, I'm gonna down a whole bunch of Red Bulls, and then I also need to loosen up. So I'm gonna have some vodka with my Red Bull, and then I'm also gonna grind through these things. And there seems to be that there's never time to slow down to recover to be able to have them go through that. And I've noticed that there's like an RPM. Like normally, say when you first start out a business or whatever it is, you're at 100 miles an hour, and you grind for so long, your 100 miles an hour becomes 80 miles an hour, and then becomes 70, or becomes 60, and you slow down. So you're trying to push as hard as you can, but you're only going 5 miles an hour, and people are just walking past you. So how do you help people that you're talking about? Well, this isn't for the crisis mode. Do you help the people in the crisis mode?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, okay. More individually. Like I have my groups, that I do. I have a group coaching program that anyone can really join that's in some sort of leadership role. And then I offer groups, internally to organizations, to whole like executive teams. And they usually have a budget for that, for like performance coaching, And then I have my one-on-one clients. And if they're in crisis mode, like I'll still, I'm not going to turn them down like, oh, I can't handle you. You're in crisis mode. It just looks different. Then it's just about triaging them out of the crisis. And then the meditation is just like when they get on the calls with me. And sometimes I'll talk to them, for 2 hours a week, like an hour twice a week. And they just have to like commit to book those hours. And then like one of those hours is talking about like unhooking from all this stress. And then another one of the hours is really just doing the techniques together live,
Yeah. I think you mentioned a little bit, but like, what's one thing, if there was like a high level CEO listening to this, that they could do if they feel themselves at the edge? What's one thing that they could do to drop from red line, at least out of the red line, down a little bit?
One thing. Just really taking on the point of view that it is real and possible to be motivated without having to kill yourself.
I can't. I have to go all the way. Yeah, that's right, and it's true. And that's the thing is you're wedging in to try to create space for them to be like, come on, man. It's
and motivation is a line in our psyche that's like that's consistent all the time. And it's like, what is your line of motivation? What's running that algorithm? And you're in control of that. Like you have a choice. And if you're running that algorithm of motivation on fight or flight, like you're just going to hit the ground, And so to get out of that issue of that algorithm, you have to first believe that it's even possible to do so.
Absolutely. And the way that in my mind that I'm think of it is we can always run on two different fuel sources, right? Diet wise, we can run on fats or we can run on sugars. I can run on Snickers bars or I can run on grass-fed butter. The negative always seems to be more powerful, but the positive always seems to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
And so like you can sustain longer on positivity, but the negative really gets you up and going. It's like that jolt of electricity.
It's an addiction to adrenaline.
Yes. Yeah. I had a realization a long time ago that I was addicted to negativity, and I let the negativity drive me to try to get things done. And I felt if I wasn't negative, that I would be afraid that I would lose motivation and I would fail.
That's it. Like you and everybody else in the world.
I'm not unique and special in my shame and guilt of the situation.
We were designed by nature to do that, That's the negativity bias in the brain. That's the survival mode, that like we actually are, and that's why it takes, it takes a lot of extra effort to get out of this, because it's like swimming upstream to our natural biology, to the negativity bias in the brain and our survival mode instincts. And so you have to, it takes a high performer to get out of that. And I'll offer like one more thing to answer your question, like for the one thing for executives, because like first, like it's like to believe that developing a new line of motivation is possible, but then it's like, well, what is that? Like, where does it come from? And this is where, more of the Eastern contemplative approaches come into play. Like I'm a student of Mahamudra Dzogchen Buddhism, and it's this concept. So for this new line of motivation, something really useful could be the concept of the Buddhist bodhicitta, developing bodhicitta, which is like being motivated outside of the self, right? That like if you could transition out of the fight or flight response and into this new line of motivation, to think about it would only benefit everyone around you. And it would only have this unforeseen and unknown domino effect for like so many people, like, and so it's like, it's reminding yourself, and then maybe you're not like in a positive impact business or whatever, but it could still be like for your own well-being. Like the more that you protect your own well-being and optimize your own well-being, it's only going to benefit all of the people around you, like your family, your employees, your friends, the people who buy your products, like whatever, and it's going to just keep going. And so to kind of start aligning with this intention, like every morning and every night before you go to bed, right when you wake up in the morning, of like having that positive effect on the people around you. So it's like shifting from the out of like this like ego motivation to be driven into being motivated out of service, right? And outside of the self. Yeah.
And I think this really powerful, and I think it is a very challenging thing. And I know because I've had storylines where I've done a lot of work to I'm not perfect. I definitely slip into these areas, but I've done a lot of work to get out of this category, where driving hard on, like, say, on my last business, and I drove really hard to try to like make things happen and do these big things, and then I'd get mad at everybody because someone might mess up or whatever, and I was like, but I'm doing this for us. But I was a terror around everybody, right? And then there's like this thing that happens that there's like a driving force to try to make it successful because you're trying to do this for yourself and everybody else around you, but then all of a sudden it becomes this like negativity vacuum where you're just like this energy that just proliferates everywhere, and it's just it's so toxic that it just disempowers everybody around you. And then you have a thing where you either have to change yourself to change the environment, or you're just going to cycle through a bunch of people who just can't stand you, right? And they just like, you just like burn them out. There's like, oh my God, no thank you, but no thank you. And so it's one of those lessons that, and I think it's a challenge. I think I do still struggle with it from time to time. On that, is catching that mindset. And it's a powerful mindset though to shift, because it sounds like to me, because I use a lot of the hero terminology from the podcast. There's the hero and the villain. The villain is someone who has great power, who serves himself, and a hero is someone who has great power, who serves the people, right? So can you shift that mindset from A to B? And maybe we're using different terminologies for it, but I love that thing if you can shift in that, like, this is a holistic approach of being of service, not just the achievement base, but also how you make people feel along the way. That whole thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's really like, it becomes more fundamental to yourself. And it's like the cheesy, Gandhi quote that everyone knows, like, be the change you want to see in the world, like, but it's really true. Right. And like I say, like, don't just be it, but lead it, and lead by example. Right. And be the embodiment, of what you want, of the positive benefit. And that's the leading by example, is that not for the thing that you're doing in the world, but for your own, like your well-being, like in your health needs to come number one, be number one, and to lead by example in that way,
Yeah. And things are trite for a reason, and they're trite because they're true. We just desensitize ourselves to it. And it's like, how do you get healthy? Diet and exercise. Yeah. What's your secret? Diet and exercise. Mental diet, mental exercise. It's the same thing, but it is true. But it's got to hit you at the right time, and I don't know, for some reason, it's that the the learning is like, experience plus emotional intensity, right, causes that retention, right? So there's something's got to hit you hard, and then when you hear that, be the change, that you want to see in the world. That's why, like, a lot of times if you're like on, scrolling through Instagram across positive quotes, it doesn't really mean anything. But if you're, four cups into ayahuasca, and you get the same quote, it's just gonna hit you different, right?
Yeah, totally.
At that point. So, um, you were saying something else as well that I thought was interesting. Is you say you do these protocols inside virtual reality as well?
Oh, well, like one of the companies that I'm advising
Mhm.
is called Horizon Mind, and it's in the beta stage, but incredible for a beta stage. And you can get it in the Apple Store now if you go to Horizon Mind. And there's I'm working with Nikolai, who's the CEO, incredible person, and then the co-founder Chris Halbaum, who was my mentor for many years, and she's like the world's leading NLP trainer and coach. And so her and her husband Tim Halbaum actually invented some of the most advanced NLP techniques, including this one called the dynamic spin release (DSR), and it's one that I've been trained personally from Chris as my mentor, and then helped Nikolai get into a virtual reality app, basically. And so I use the dynamic spin release with my clients, and so now I'm able to actually just say, go work on that if you have an Oculus, like in virtual reality. It's pretty cool.
So
Yeah.
it's the Horizon Mind, and it's inside the Oculus store.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool. I just want to check.
Horizonmind.io. Yeah, if people want to check it out. And then I think it's updated now, and if it's not, it will be soon, with EMI, eye movement integration, which is very similar to EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And EMDR was actually derived from EMI, from NLP, a long time ago. So they're very similar.
That's super
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, and that's the, so just unpacking a little bit, the NLP, neuro linguistic programming, using words to be able to kind of reprogram the brain,
Yeah.
right? And then the EMDR is the rapid eye movement that you think about a traumatic response as you move your eyes around, and you kind of desensitize yourself to the original trauma of the situation so that you can retain the memory and think about it without freaking out like you get dunked in a bottle of cold water or something.
Yeah.
So,
Totally. Great description. Thank you. Yeah.
cool. I want to go through some of these pieces, so that anybody's listening can understand it. That sounds fantastic and super great. And this thing, bridging the gaps where you take the technology, right? You have this latest technology like virtuality, and then you take this psychology technologies, and then you blending these things together. I think is a wonderful thing. So then you do coaching on that, and you guide people through those processes, and you're beta testing that type of stuff to kind of see the effectiveness. What's the result of the application? Is it leading people through mental wellness, or?
Well, my whole thing is to to facilitate people into stabilized flow.
Okay.
That's my one and only targeted outcome in working with people. And so I use techniques like NLP and,
Mhm.
EMDR, EMI, and the dynamic spin release technique, and other ones, to basically, as part of the formula, is identifying limiting beliefs and like where they come from, right? Identifying what I'm calling like the false self narrative, which is the archetype of are the limitations that we've created for ourselves. And so identifying what that is, using these techniques, and then adding in the stack of the meditation and positive psychology exercises. And that will get them into stabilized flow.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Because you have a lot of these false narrative stories holding you back, limiting you, not allowing you to kind of move forward with confidence. Because a lot of people, they want tactics. How do I get rich? How do I do this, right? And they want the tactics, but it's getting that mindset. But that mindset is it's a simple word, mindset.
Yeah.
But, but it is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So you say, getting past that false self narrative and those things is technically speaking a bitch, and
Yeah.
to be able to do that. So in terms of like helping people unpack that and helping people go through that, like you have what do you think in terms of like timelines to help people? Can you fix them in 60 seconds and get rid of all their problems so they don't have any issues? You know,
Two weeks.
is there a pill that they could take that they don't have to put in any effort whatsoever? No, but I'd love to learn about, like, what would you say in terms of like, if they're working with you, timelines and things like that to help people, because it's a process. These things it's like working out. I want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger tomorrow. Meh, probably not. So I'd love to like learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, everyone's different, and it really depends on like how much work you've already done on yourself, and if there's like heavy trauma, and how much you've actually looked at that. But generally speaking, like I have a group of 14 people right now, and we spent the first 2 weeks of the program, of a seven-week program, on this false self narrative. And I could probably say that every person in the group like got to like a deeper layer of understanding by just presenting these frameworks, and asking very specific questions, and empowering them to self-facilitate. I think a lot of coaches and therapists out there, like, it creates this like codependent relationship where you need the sessions with the person to like get through the thing, and I'm just like, you guys are high performers, like, do it yourself, here's how you do it.
It totally is, because it becomes a thing of like, solve my problems for me. Right?
Yeah, I don't.
Versus saying I'm gonna give you the tools. Is there a primer or some sort of way that you let them know that you're not gonna like, they got to do the work? Is there a way to kind of like set that so you don't come across that where like, hey, I showed up and I didn't do anything, but I'm still mentally and emotionally out of shape. And it's your fault. So is there any ways that you guide people to kind of say, hey man, you gotta do some work to get to where you want to go?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty straightforward about that from the get-go. And like some of these frameworks that I present are like force you to be very effacing, right? I present on Dr. Shafali. Have you heard of Dr. Shafali?
No.
She's an incredible psychologist, clinical psychologist. And she has this book called Radical Awakening. And in the book, she presents this bundle of chapters on what she calls like the ego masks, or the ego archetype, like these masks that we wear. And we've heard of a lot of them, right? Like the perfectionist, the people pleaser, which is like, the people pleaser is like the tyrant, because like they say yes to everything, and under deliver, and then become resentful and angry, and then like freak out and rage because they're like being underappreciated, right? And the perfectionist of like having too high of standards, so much they're so afraid of failure that they never, and everything has to be perfect because like they can't fail, so much so that it actually prevents them from achieving anything in the first place, right? And then the list goes on, to all kinds of overachieving, and the victim, the diva, the princess, like all these things of basically what it is like these masks of these coping mechanisms, because the term is trauma response, right? So there's the trauma that you have, but then it's like, how did you cope with it? How did you respond to it? And that's actually what makes us us, right? That's like this mask that we wear of seeking external validation of the unmet needs that we didn't get as a child, of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not safe. And so we constantly project these stories externally to get the unmet needs, instead of just giving them to ourselves and like, reparenting ourselves in a way. And so to answer your question, I guess like the way that I teach and the way that I present, it's just like, it just forces you to be like, whoa, like,
Yeah. Have you one that's great is great, and with looking at those different masks, right? There's X amount of masks. I don't know how many masks there are, but are there ones that are cause a negative spiral with each other? Like, and in terms of like, have you seen these relationships between these different masks? Because from one of the things that I've seen one trauma type trigger another trauma type, and then they start feeding off different people, right? Yeah, and so do you know any common patterns that you can talk that kind of pop up? So like maybe like there's a relationship or a situation that could be at work or an actual relationship or any of that stuff. Is there what patterns have you seen where these masks fight with each other?
Yeah, honestly, I think that like most of reality is
Yeah,
functioning from that
yeah,
level of complexity,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like we're all just like 5-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 7-year-olds,
For
like
sure.
freaking out and throwing tantrums, trying to relate to each other. And like our entire society is based around like what you just asked, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's a big mess.
Can you pull up a whiteboard real quick and just draw this out for me real fast? I'd be really curious to just unearth the social issues that we all face. I mean, it's an interesting thing because I've seen that. I've seen those trauma
Yeah,
responses affect each other. But when you're talking about it, it really hit home for me. And I'd love to like learn about, because
yeah.
there's gotta be when you put A and B into a room, you take the messy person and the OCD person and you put them in a room, you're gonna have basically a sitcom.
Yeah.
They
Well,
coll
it's called trauma bonding, you know?
Oh, is it called trauma bonding? I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, and it shows up, in intimate relationships. It's like, okay, is the intimacy here, are we bonding from like the really hurt 3-year-old and the really hurt 7-year-old? And that's like where we're having intimacy is because we're fulfilling those unmet needs. And then it just become over time, it just becomes so toxic.
Gotta dismantle.
It's
Gotta,
life, Another
uh,
one is, attachment styles, and there's a
mm,
ton of research out there on how different attachment styles, anxious avoidant, secure, and like how they kind of complement each other or actually re-trigger like our traumas. And so those relationships, when we get into dynamics like that, and I work with executives and with businesses and companies, and so I talk about it more of like the level of intimacy that shows up in our work environment, and it's all the same. And it's just our relationship to life, and so when we're able to kind of break down some of these frameworks, it's just kind of takes off some of the pressure.
you talk about executives and working with them and intimacy with their team members or their executive teams and things like that. There's a challenge around being vulnerable. There's a challenge around communication and difficult conversations in workplace. Do you help executives with that, navigating those things and unpacking the trauma issues or the trauma bondings that they have between um, the toxicity that can form through long-term relationships in business?
Yeah, and just like, yeah, helping people navigate what healthy emotional connection looks like and what it is. Totally. And I think part of it is like bringing these frameworks to the forefront and promoting, a self-effacing mentality of vulnerability when these stories start being projected onto each other, and just like pointing out that it's like universal, right? Like we all struggle with this, like we all have these, and it's not just one coping mechanism, it's like 5 of them, like all at once. And so it's just like, like we're here laughing, and it's just kind of creating this lightheartedness around it, that we all struggle with this, and creating a culture around like just like when it comes up, being able to laugh it off, and like and actually learning and defining what that healthy, secure form of relating is without all those stories,
Yeah.
and from our true nature rather than the false stories, to be able to identify like the best outcome in business and relationship.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we're laughing because part of this is it's funny because we're so silly as humans. It's just a silly thing that we do,
Yeah.
right? And things are, and we're laughing because it's also true.
So true. Yeah.
There's things that happen that you're like, yeah, that's it's like, you kind of bring in your. It's almost like kids when they're young, they have their like lunch snacks and they open it up. They're like, hey, here's my lunch snacks. You want to trade this trauma for that trauma? Do you want
Yeah.
to trade? And just kind of like show them what everybody got. But it's an interesting thing because you're right. We all of us are still like, no matter how old we get. I saw this one kid who was just like, I don't know, maybe 3 years old, and he was raging about something. Someone took his doll and he was just raging. And in my mind, like, I saw him and I was just like, wow, like that kid is having an experience that I've seen in like 30-year-olds who lose their company because some investor kicked them out of it and they're just raging. And
Right.
the thing is like even though we get old and we get mature or whatever the things is, our feelings don't mature, right? We still have those feelings. We get rage, we get gratitude, we get grief, we get all those pains, we get all those things that come around. But you just learn how to manage them ideally. You over time you learn how to manage them in a healthy way, and that's really interesting to try to say, like, how do you, if you do have a bunch of these you know, people that are technically still babies, just wearing suits or whatever they're
Yeah,
doing as
totally.
high executives, right?
100%.
Like, how do you get them to play well in the lunch yard, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
advice do you give to them to being able to how they can actually
Well,
share their lunches in peace?
totally. Well, I give them techniques, and we've been talking a lot about this concept of the false self narrative and these
Mm,
frameworks that I offer, but really that's less than 1/3 of what I do,
mhm,
right? And the other huge portion of what I do is teaching a variety of different meditation techniques that, and each, if you understand the neuroscience of meditation, each different technique from each wisdom tradition and each category upregulates a different area of the brain. So you can kind of customize like the outcome of your meditation practice if you really know what you're doing with meditation itself. And so the way that I teach meditation is, by a style of meditation that upregulates the same area of the brain as flow state, the anterior
mhm,
cingulate cortex, and then combine that with these like kind of like what I call like neuro hacks, to increase it like the happiness set point, and these positive psychology techniques. And there's a variety of them, and some are just like one-off things that,
mhm,
well-researched positive psychology, just like one-off journaling exercises, or, and then some of them are like you do them every day, every morning and every night, they're short and sweet. Basically, you do them every day for a minimum of 2 weeks, and you see the effect. And so it
mhm,
boosts your mentality, it boosts your self-esteem. And you do that while you're doing this excavating of the false self story and while you're meditating. So you're gaining this greater understanding of the self
mhm,
while also not getting too caught up in it, in the darkness of it and the heaviness of it, because you're also boosting, your self-esteem and doing these positive psychology exercises. And so that's, the research. I was Jeffrey Martin's, intern at the Trans Tech
mhm.
Lab, and like that's well researched, the combination of those things. And then you add in, like identifying the limiting beliefs, and it's just like will take you there so much faster.
That's awesome. And yeah, there's a lot. I mean, diving inwards into the brain, it's a vast ocean. I mean, you can go infinitely deep as you can go infinitely outwards, and understanding how to unlock those different keys is there's, you know, meditations. When you say the word meditation, it's like, you know, mindset, mindfulness. It's a word
Yeah.
that is infinitely deep. You were talking about something, and I just want to touch on. I don't know if I misheard you, or I don't know if that's. But you said something about different wisdom trees or different
Oh, with
wisdom
the wisdom traditions, like,
wisdom systems. Yeah, could you say
yeah.
more about that?
Well, there's just each different kind of wisdom Eastern wisdom tradition. Like there's different lineages, right?
Mm,
Like there's, different. I mean, there's Buddhism, but there's so many different types of Buddhism that come with a different sets of techniques and have different outcomes. And then you're basically like engineering like a brain state with different
mm,
techniques, and then you can combine certain ones and really get clear about like what the outcome is. And like, and the outcome that I want to help people with is getting into the highest levels of performance excellence with stabilized flow, that
mm,
have actually not been, um, outlined by Western psychologists yet, because we're bringing in the Eastern philosophies and these Eastern wisdom traditions and basically reverse engineering the stabilized flow through like a very unique combination of techniques,
mm,
for this. And it has to do with motivation, this line of motivation. It's like what, and what changes. And then there's like the stages of development, right? And there's higher stages of development. And what changes when you move up the developmental line as an adult is what you're motivated by. And so when you bring that in too, it's like you can get, but I mean, it's fun.
it's it's fun. I mean, it's fascinating. Like, I mean, being in psychology and understanding the way people work with each other, how people work on themselves, and things like that. It's one of the, it's very um uh sidearm chair counselor kind of thing of like watching. Like, one of the things I love to do is like going, pre-COVID, out in public and like watching people interact and watching why they interact and just sitting there and observing them. It's understanding ourselves and understanding the way that we interact with each other is utterly fascinating. And it sounds like one of the things you're looking at is you're looking at their motivations, understanding how their motivations change over time, understanding where they want to get to in a certain state, and then saying, okay, based on your motivation and based on, you know, where you're at and where you want to go, you can follow this wisdom tradition up and it will get you to where you want to go, which is fascinating to me. Is this, in terms of what we've been talking about this, you're talking about the 5 myths of sustaining high performance. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in terms of the myths?
Yeah, well, I would, you know, if people are interested in like debunking what that I've found, you know, over through my experience of these top 5 myths that get in the way from your leadership capacity to be in the stabilized flow, then go to, you know, my website, flow.lindsaybriner.com, to get access to the recording that I did very recently. I'll do another one. You can sign up and learn about my group. Yeah. I go over. I mean, it's like an hour and a half recorded thing. I don't think we have time for that right now. Sorry.
You got 2 minutes. Let's go. Come on. We're going to cut this again. Come on. Yeah. No, I get it. It's one of those things that it's also just tying together and like the things that you're really passionate about and then understanding these like uncommon. So what do you think is can you give us one thing that stands out that is something that is a mistake that other people have made that people might believe to be true that's not really true? I guess that is a myth.
So like one of them, like one of them, which is the biggest one essentially, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's basically that performance, excellence, and inner peace are compatible. Contrary to cultural belief systems.
Yeah, man. Oh man, yeah. I completely feel you on that one. I had on my for a long time. I had written on my whiteboard is how do I be both pleasant and productive.
Yeah,
right?
that's it, right?
And I was like, how do I get there? I'm not necessarily saying I knew exactly how to get there. I'm like, if I could figure that out, that'd be awesome.
Flow mindset. Well, that's my expertise. Just call me.
I love it. Well, so then talk about this in terms of what you're doing, right? What is the journey you've been on from doing the trans tech and then all the studies and the wisdom traditions and helping executives along this path and everything else. What's your holy grail? What's your flag in the sand? What's the thing that you're trying to achieve from doing all of this?
Yeah, well, for me, I just like, you know, I feel really passionately about, you know, the future generations, you know, and what's going to happen, you know, like with the rise of exponential growth technology and all of the risks, if people have seen, you know, the social dilemma and, you know, all of the risks that we face, like existential and catastrophic risk factors through the exponential growth of technology. And so it's like really exciting and there's really fun aspects to it, but there's also like, you know, a lot of risks. And so my passion is really in, you know, accessing these high-level tech executives and their executive teams and the engineering teams that are doing the code for like our social networks and all these things, and really introducing them into the flow mindset formula and the stabilized flow formula that I have to help people evolve on their developmental stage to be motivated, you know, from outside of the self-interest, you know, motivational line, which is what keeps us into the fight or flight mode. And to help these industry leaders and, you know, engineers that are building the technology to function from like the bodhicitta, right? From the motivation of wanting to be in service and to really be able to see the bird's eye view of the further future of the next generations, to be able to build something that could be more sustainable with technology in a really good way, you know?
Yeah. And so it sounds like what you're saying your holy grail is, and tell me if I've got this right. Your holy grail is the inspiring the people that are creating the technologies for social connections or just the applications, inspiring them about using this transformative technologies to kind of push us into a more abundant mindset and less flight or fight. Is that kind of, is that?
Yeah, just help people grow up and start thinking, mature, think better,
Yeah.
make better decisions. Like we have children who are going to have children.
Yeah. It's gonna nudge us towards the utopia, not towards the disaster side.
Exactly,
Yeah. I love it.
exactly.
So if that is the holy grail goal for you, what's the dragon? Like, what's the dragon for you that might be so big to overcome that you don't know if you're able to?
Great question. Yeah. Um, I feel like I'm riding the dragon, like I'm on my path, and it's been really beautiful. Like I have a couple groups that I'm running right now, and I'm working with some incredible executives. And I think the next stage of my business is really focusing more on working with whole executive teams for
Mm,
like big tech companies and just big companies in general, to really be able to impact culture from like the top down in that way. Um, and bringing in, some of the technologies I've been so busy moving forward, the coaching approach that I want to start bringing in, like world class heart rate variability experts, and
mm,
that use breath work to help train, my clients and these executive teams into like self-regulating the heart, and like, so start bringing in more experts and growing a team to really collaborate and do this together. So if you
mm.
know of any, let me know.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. 100%, yeah, and that's right. So it's expanding, it's growing, it's being able to
Yeah,
expand your reach and be able to actually like kind of scale past yourself and kind of create kind of a tight community of impactful
experts,
peoples and experts that kind of expand. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
I know a couple of people. we we can 100% talk about that for sure. Lindsay, this has been wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
I don't know, just reach out, find me on lindsaybriner.com, and the webinars at flow.lindsaybriner.com. I'm on social media, and just reach out anytime. If you join my group, you'll know that like or everyone in my group knows that like I'm all about like the personal connection and the personal relationships. I'm not here to sell a product. I'm here to really facilitate transformation. And so, yeah, I'm here for you. Yeah.
Awesome, Lindsay. Well, thank you so much for showing up. We appreciate you being here. Have a beautiful and blessed day, and I will see you on the other side.
Yeah, great, Dylan.
Take care now.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening.